We're raw dogging it this morning, folks.
Hey, poor! Hey, poor! Hey, poor! You don't have to be poor anymore! Jesus is here!
The loudspeaker spoke up and said, stupid.
Greetings, fellow worker slaves, podcasting at 128 kilobits from the Fortress of Squalitude, not far from the Redneck Mecca. This is the Atheist in the Trailer Park podcast. I'm your host, Tucker. Professor Fuzznuts is busy chasing buttons around the house. Yes, it's a podcast hosted by a guy and his cats. Get over it. This was going to be a news show episode, but, life got in the way in more ways than one. When I started this thing, the government was shut down, and before I could record, the shutdown ended. 20 minutes of material. Gone. All of it. Just have to throw it all the fuck out. Start over from scratch. So, let me give you guys the rundown on what's been going on with me, and we'll get to a few other things as well. So last week they sent me a message and said, hey, your background check came back okay. We're going to go ahead and hire you. We need you to come in and fill out some paperwork. And then, you'll start the first Sunday after you fill out the paperwork as one of our employees. Well, I'm like, yay, that's great. So I set it up for Friday after I get off. That way it's all, I'm not hopefully staying up too late, etc., etc. And that didn't go quite as planned. I had the meeting when I was supposed to, but what I didn't count on was that I would have to deal with 45 pages worth of paperwork. And that doesn't even cover things like benefits or, 401k or any of that shit. That was just like code of conduct, the non-disclosure agreement, which I have to sign, and, filling out stuff for direct deposit, etc., etc. And let me get to the whole direct deposit thing, because that is just... Okay, I work for a multinational. They have operations literally all over the world. I think they even have them in, on every continent except for Antarctica. I'm not kidding. They're that large. And they use, at least in the U.S., one of the largest, payroll firms out there. They tell me, that, I sign up for direct deposit because I want my money as quick as I can get it. And they're like, oh, yeah, it takes at least 2 weeks for that to kick in. And then because of various circumstances dealing with scheduling, etc., etc., it's probably going to be over, it'll be a week and a half past almost when I would expect to get a check that I'll actually get my first check from them. Yay. Which puts me in a bit of a bind because guess what's due tomorrow? My electric bill. Which is going to suck up most of my paycheck that I'm getting tomorrow. And it's going to be a race with the devil to pay my electric bill before they get here to pull the meter off. And then I don't know what I'm going to do to keep going till the Patreon money hits. Because... Patreon money will not hit my account. I know they bill everybody at the first of the month, but it takes 5 days before it hits my account after they bill everybody. Thanks, guys. So I just don't know. If anybody wants to PayPal me some money, I would that help me tide me over in this coming dry period. I would really appreciate it. And I've got at least this week and next week. I'm only putting in 4 days because that's what they've scheduled for whatever reason, and that's going to be complicated for me because even though I'll be making more money, I'll be getting less hours. So it may work out that I'm coming out the same. I don't know. It's one of those things. Until I start getting a paycheck from them, I won't be able to gauge any of this shit because, anything you work over 40 hours is overtime. But additionally, if you work over 8 hours, that's overtime. So even though we're only scheduled for 32 hours and we may only work, say, 34 hours, I still could get some overtime. But I won't know any of that until, I get paychecks, et cetera, which by that point, it's just the joys of being poor. Okay, so anyways, get all the paperwork done. I'm an official employee, save for the fact that I can't use the time clock, which leads me to think that it's probably going to be a little longer before I get my first check because they have system issues and it sometimes takes longer to add you so you can punch in or out. Well, that means somebody's got to manually enter my pay. So that's, I have a feeling that, in theory, I would get my first check from them next week. It's, plus a couple of days because of the foul ups from how long it takes for them to get me my paper check. Probably going to have to add a couple of more days to that because of the foul ups caused by the fact that I can't use the time clock, so it's not automatically entered in. I have to manually do it or manually tell somebody what my hours were, and then they'll probably want to verify them with management, which they'll have to wait for them to get back, and then they'll have to manually punch that in and cut me a check, and that'll, by that point, it'll be, at least a week more without no money. Yay! So, anyways, do all the paperwork, get home, exhausted, crash out, get up Saturday, or late Friday evening, early Saturday morning, start working on the script, for the show, get everything together, and thinking about recording. And then I get a call from a friend of mine. Hey, the Democrats are having a meeting today. You going? Well, fuck. I ought to go. I know I ought to go. So I go. And I'm glad I did, but that shot my day. So here's what happened at the meeting. And yes, you will find this interesting, trust me. One of the people there at the meeting brought up, hey, it's an election year. We are supposed to be doing these things and have these committees set up. So far as they can tell, we're not doing those things and those committees haven't been set up. And the head of county party, guy by the name of Tony, is like, well, problem we have is that we've got these volunteers and they tend not to do anything and they're volunteers, so you can't really do much to them and you got to work with what you got. Well, that set several of us off. I mean, it was not a really large meeting, but it was sort of an impromptu meeting that didn't have any advance announcement. So perhaps if they'd have said more, there would have been a larger turnout. Anyways. So one woman, I'll call her Sarah, because I don't know if she wants me mentioning her name on this podcast. just lays into Tony and says, look, this is what we're supposed to do. And if you're a volunteer for the Red Cross and you don't show up, you don't, you get fired. They don't ask you to help anymore. And, she was obliquely trying to make the point that there's a real leadership problem here. She wasn't directly trying to attack Tony, but she was letting him know that he needed to be doing more. And later on, she gave me some details on that, which I'll get into. And I was trying to point out to Tony that, hey, guy, we have to do shit. We really have to do shit because, well, not only is it an election year, but, well, things are really good for the Democrats. And, the point all of us were trying to get across is that this is the time to go for broke. This is the time to come out and do things. And, the woman, Sarah, she kept saying, look, I have people who call me who say, I've been to this event, I've been to that event, and the reason I'm not going to anymore is because you guys aren't doing anything. You just sort of seem to hang out and talk. There's no action. There's not even an action plan. And she pointed out that there were all these things that they had said that they were going to do besides, the committees for promoting people getting elected and things like that they weren't doing. And Tony was just kind of hemming and hawing around, well, the volunteers. And the point I tried to make, and he shut me down before I could actually make it, is, in a situation like that, what you have to do, and this is good advice for everybody, because if you're listening to my voice and you're an American, for fuck's sakes, call your local party, find out when they're having their next meeting, and go to it. Look them up on the web. They're there. Find them and go. But the thing is if you're, a leader in that situation and, you've got volunteers and you've got meetings scheduled and whether or not you have issues with people showing up, good thing to do, which will encourage people to show up, is the day before the meeting, call that person to politely remind them and say, hey, wanted to make sure that you knew that we were going to have a meeting. It's kind of important you be there. You're an integral part of our organization. Blah, 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 kind of bullshit them, tell them they're important. That really gets their attention, Everybody's a narcissist to some degree or another. So if you say, hey, you contribute, you help out, even if you're just saying, hey, you've got good ideas, that gets people interested. And then what you do is you call the people who missed the meetings afterwards and say, hey, listen, I know you missed the meeting. I'm sorry. I'm sure it was something important that made you miss the meeting. Let me tell you what we went over and, get your input on it and make sure that, we can get you at the next meeting. That makes that person feel important, makes it feel like something's happening, so they're inclined to show up at future meetings, and they're inclined to do things. But, why do something if nobody else is doing anything? That's the thing you have to fight against, which Tony doesn't understand. Sarah and the other people at the thing did. Excuse me. One of the things that happened, which was really good, in my personal opinion, is that we cleaned up the office in the sense that we took down all the stuff related to the 2016 elections. It's like, one woman, and I don't remember her name, she made, very good point. We need to be looking forward, not looking backward. Let's take down all this stuff. We don't have to throw it out or whatever, but we can, we want people to know that we're looking forward when we're not focused on what happened in 2016. We're focused on the future, which is important, I think. Because, we can sit here and we can talk about, what went wrong, and, how much better things would be if Hillary was president. And, we can do all these things that are, they reaffirm what we believed in 2016, but they don't get us going forward. And, really, I don't care about somebody who voted for Hillary, or not in 2016. I need people to vote Democratic or something other than Republican in 2018. That's what I need. And we need to get, we need to focus on the future and getting the elections captured. And Sarah and the other woman, whose name I don't remember, both pointed out that there were, the other county parties were doing a lot more. And I live in an area where we're actually fairly close to a couple of different counties. So if it's easy to pop over to one if you're interested in something that's going on over there. And, Sarah pointed out, she says, look, this other party, what was it? Well, the Davidson and the Rutherford County Democratic parties were both having training sessions. They charged modestly for them, $15 a head, to teach people how to register for folks to vote, and to teach people how to, help people get their voting rights back if they had lost them. And Sarah's point was like, why don't we do this? Why don't we do this? We need to be doing this here. And Tony kind of waffled on it. And, and he's like, well, we got to find a venue. And I'm like, we got a fucking office, man. Let's hold this shit here. Let's be bold. Let's let people know that there's a Democratic Party in this county. And I don't know if he bought it or not. Tony strikes me as a guy who he likes being the big fish in the little pond, so he's not really wanting to push anything because he's got it good. So we went over that, and the other thing that they started doing, and they haven't finished it yet, but they're going to work on that sometime this week, I think. Well, I know they are. Because Sarah is dead set on doing this. But they're going to, one of the changes they're going to make to the office is we got these maps, and they're putting up information on the maps like, this is your county commissioner for this district, this is your city, commissioner for this district, blah, 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 things like that. So people know who their representatives locally are, they know how to contact them, and things like that, which I think will really help. The other thing that supposed to happen is supposedly the party has lists of companies where the owner of the company is a Democrat. And I said, we need to have that posted in this office where people can see it so that they can, they come in and they're like, hey, this business is owned by a Democrat, that one's owned by a Democrat. I'm going to support that business. And I also said, you've got to have the listings that are, this is business is unionized, that business is unionized, so people can support those. Because, unions and Democrats up until fairly recently were really tight, and we need them to be tight now. And after all, some of the views of the Democrats and the unions are identical. The Democrats want, better protection for workers and higher pay for workers. What do unions want? Better protection for workers and higher pay for workers. It should be a natural, but because the Democrats haven't quite had the focus that they should have, that message has been lost over the years. And I said, since my job is unionized, that when I meet the union rep, I am going to make sure that he comes to the Democratic headquarters and gives a talk. I don't care on what about. I don't care any of that shit. But just so that he knows that we're here, because until last year, I didn't know they had a county party. And I've lived here 20 years. I'm sure lots of other people are the same way. Now, of course, it all remains to be seen if Tony will do the things that he said he was going to do, because he was supposed to get people certain information, and he claimed he was going to have it by the end of this week. We'll see. I'm going to touch base with some of those people and make sure that they actually got what they were supposed to. Unfortunately, we're stuck with Tony until next year if he didn't do what he was supposed to do. But I'm plotting evilly on doing an end run around him if need be. Tony is, comfortable, middle class. He's, I don't know if he's IT, but he works for Comcast, if I'm not mistaken. And, he's a technician for them in some manner. I don't think he goes out and fixes, your cable or whatever. I think he's a technician located in an office and, something like that. So his job is relatively secure in theory. Obviously, if the economy really craters, then he's at risk of being laid off or let go because he's over 50. So naturally, if things get a little tight, they'd want to get rid of him and replace him with somebody who's a lot younger and they can pay for less money to. And then Tony has to worry about, finding a job when he's over 50, when they're less likely to hire you because they know you're not some stupid idiot who will do whatever they tell you to for no money. But I don't think that's crossed Tony's mind as of yet. It certainly crosses my mind because I turned 50 this year. I mean, one of the reasons why I was so reluctant to quit my last job after Trump won, and I found out that they weren't going to pay me what they claimed they were going to pay me, is because, well, it's medical field, so the odds are, if the economy takes a downturn, they'll still have plenty of work. I didn't count on them doing the bullshit that they did to get rid of me, but that's another tale entirely. However, since this current job is food preparation, it's got kind of some security to it. Because people do need to eat. And it is union, so in theory, I'm less likely to get laid off with no support than I would be at another job. When the economy does crater, which it almost certainly will. I mean, I don't know where you guys live. I know roughly a third of my listeners are outside the U.S., so you guys could just kind of glaze over while I talk about this. But for the 2/3 of you who are in the U.S., you need to get involved. And I know that the whole thing is, well, gosh, the parties don't do anything, blah, 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 whatever. You can change that on the local level. And that, my friend, is important despite how it may seem. I mean, obviously, getting elected somebody to the school board isn't nearly the kind of achievement as getting somebody elected to the White House. But remember, in the late 80s, the GOP said, we're going to go after the local and state elections heavily and get those. And they were able to use that to take control of state legislatures as well as the federal government. Meanwhile, the Democrats just focused on national elections. That was a complete mistake on the Democrats' part. So I don't care if you're a member of the Port Party or the Green Party or whatever, or Democrat. Go to your local meetings, get them involved, get involved and force them to do something. Like I was going back to the whole thing about, well, you call somebody the night before, say, hey, we got a meeting tomorrow. Want to make sure you're going to be able to make it. And if you're not, is there anything you'd like me to say on your behalf? If they miss, call them, say, hey, sure you had to miss for an important reason. We were sorry you weren't there. Let me tell you what went on. That makes people feel important. That gets them more inclined to be involved. And doing even simple little things creates a snowball effect because people see, hey, this person is doing something. So, I'm more inclined to be involved than if nobody's doing anything. That's why I'm excited that they're going to put out the maps with the council representatives and things like that on it and their contact information. And it's also why I'm going to push Sarah and the others to do an end run around Tony if he's not willing to do it. But, if there's businesses owned by people who are members of your local party, get those listed. Or, if there's industries in your area that support causes that you agree with. If you're, like me, a space fanatic, and there's a machine shop in that area that does aerospace equipment, and a lot of them do, that needs to be listed. And yes, lots of machine shops will do ordinary jobs for menial people. You don't have to call them up and say, listen, I need 10,000 widgets, and can you do it for me? You can call them up and say, hey, look, man, I'm looking for a machine shop that can make this one widget for me. And a number of them will say, yeah, simply because times are tight for a lot of them. There is a lot any individual can do at the local level. I know it's not as dramatic as the things that happen on the national level, but it's just as important. I mean, because, again, that's how the Republicans have gotten where they are, by going after local elections. So, get involved. You don't have to run for office. Just show up at the fucking meetings of whatever local party you happen to like, or kind of lean towards, or think has the best shot of winning, that you sort of agree with, and make your voice heard. Again, I realize somebody in the middle of Ass Rape, Tennessee, is in a different situation than somebody in the middle of, say, Los Angeles, California. But you can have an impact there. And it's not widely known, and I'm going to say it here on the podcast, if you have an iPhone. Unfortunately, the app is iOS only. The Democratic Party has an app called Knock 10, and that gives you information not only on how to talk to people about politics, but who in your area might be all that receptive to hearing your comments. And studies have shown that face-to-face interaction is more influential in changing people's opinions than anything else. Lots and lots of people have come out and said, I changed my whole opinion on gay rights after I found out my friend or my relative was gay. And, not nearly as many people say, well, I don't know anyone who's gay. I'm not related to anyone who's gay. But, ethically speaking, I think, the gays should be treated as equals. So get out with people, interact with them. I mean, that's one of the things that I was telling them at the meeting, was they were discussing, well, we're trying to find a place to have this or that event. And I'm like, fucking have it here. You're not going to get that many people in the beginning, so we've got plenty of room in this place. When it gets bigger, we can look for a larger place. And I was telling them, we've got to talk to these people. We've got to talk to those people, because they're the demographics that are most likely, going to embrace us and support us, and they're the ones we really need. It kind of fell on deaf ears because, again, Tony wants to be the big fish in the little pond, and he's not really concerned about doing more. Again, I will be touching base with my friend Sarah to see exactly if Tony has held up his end of the bargain. If it doesn't, then I will be plotting with Sarah on how to do an end run around Tony. Because this shit is fucking ridiculous. Now, what else can I bore you with? I'm a little distracted at the moment. Buttons has crawled up into my arms and is demanding to be held like a baby and being all adorable. One thing I will say, something that I discovered just by showing up at the meetings, and if I hadn't been at this past meeting, I'd have never known. One of the women there was talking, and she was explaining what she did as something to keep her occupied while she was retired. Turns out that she works for a not a cat rescue organization so much, but one that does aid cats. Well, there's a dozen feral cats that have been dumped in this area, in the trailer park, that live under my trailer that I take care of. And, I don't have the means to get them neutered or anything else. And she's like, oh, yes, well, because they're what's known as community cats, there is a free service that gets them, that will neuter them. They do what's called TNR, trap, neuter, release. And the idea is that you trap the cats, you get them neutered, you release them back to where you got them from, and that keeps other stray cats from showing up in the area. So, if I hadn't gone to this meeting, I would have known that, and, we're going to be getting all the cats fixed next week, so that there's not this giant cat colony in the area. I'm a softie when it comes to cats, so if somebody dumps one off, I put food out for it. But, there's those interactions that you can have, which are valuable because, shit, if I had a car, there were people who could have gotten me a job. But, because I don't have a car, they couldn't have gotten me a job. Of course, those jobs they would have gotten me wouldn't pay what this one is supposed to be paying me. So, hey, it's a trade-off. But the other thing that's nice is that, the meeting place and my job are really close together. So when I do get to talk to the union rep, I can tell him, look, asshole, you don't have to go far, so I don't want to hear no excuses from you as to why you can't make it for when they have a meeting. Another thing I will go back to is, in a previous episode, and don't ask me which one because I don't remember, I pointed out that, churches have certain things that they do, well, religions, not just churches, but they have certain things that they do that they structure their, the members' lives around, so they reinforce belief and ideas. And these are perfectly adaptable to the realm of atheism without compromising any of our values. I mean, there are times when it would be really easy to point out the scientific method to somebody. I'll never forget, there was a friend of mine, he was telling me about this child rearing thing that he read about, and the scenario they were describing and how to deal with it was, kid A is at the dinner table and using their spoon to flick peas at kid B. How do you handle it? And they gave scenarios which were approved. Now, the thing that they didn't do that I thought of, and I pointed out to my friend that, again, it doesn't compromise anybody's values, and it reinforces the kinds of values that we should believe in, is that, okay, one of the things they said was, the kid A had to apologize to kid B, right? Well, in addition to that, why don't you make kid A do a report on first-class levers? Because if they're using a spoon to flick peas at kid B, they're using a first-class lever. Then they're forced to learn about science. That gets the kids thinking. And as I said, at the dinner table, when I was a kid growing up, hey, guess what? We're going to read this religious-related story before we eat. They were short stories. It took you maybe a couple of minutes to read them. You could read a science article at the dinner table, an article about politics. I read it was a history of the Kennedy family, and old Joe Kennedy at the dinner table, he had a map of the globe, or, map of the world up on the dinner table, and he would point to various countries and ask the children, they're Joe Jr., JFK, Bobby, Teddy, and them, what happened in this country this week? So the kids would have to learn. It got them focused. That's a simple thing you can do. When you go to one of these political meetings, suggest that, hey, let's, at some point, let's discuss a prominent political figure in this area who's from our party, or even not from our party, who we disagree or agree with, Let's make sure we discuss this issue. Structure things around that so you get people thinking. You're out and about and you see this little thing, you point out, hey, the government paid for that. Don't ever say the government never did anything for you, because they paid for that road, or that bridge, or this park was paid for the government, or something like that. And if you do it right, even if the person is opposed to your politics, you'll get them thinking, not directly, but you'll sneak in that back door. So if somebody's opposed to gay rights and you're, you know that this person is a fan of architecture, point out Philip Johnson was gay. Or, they're a big fan of the internet. Point out that Alan Turing, who was responsible for a lot of the building blocks of computer technology, was a gay man. And you don't have to be confrontational about it. You just drop it in a subtle way, that will get them thinking. There's a great cartoon by the Oatmeal. I mean, obviously the Oatmeal has oodles of great cartoons, but he's got one. It's called "You're Not Going to Believe What I'm About to Tell You," and I will put that in a link to that in the show notes. But basically, it talks about how we get defensive when information is presented to us in a certain way. And sometimes it doesn't even have to be what the information is presented to make it appealing. It's just how it's presented. A recent case in point, okay? Everybody has been talking about the speech Oprah gave at the Golden Globes. I have no fucking clue as to her speech. I don't watch award shows. I have no interest in them, for the simple fact that if you take any particular year of, say, the Oscars, and you look up what film won the Best Picture nomination, or, what film won the Oscar for Best Picture, and then compare it to the other films that were released that year, unless it's a very recent film, odds are the films which didn't win and probably didn't even get nominated are ones you think of that were released in that year. I'll give you a perfect example, because you probably, some of you have never seen either film, but you've certainly heard of the one, even if you haven't heard of the other. 1941. Anybody know what the Best Picture Oscar winning film was? Rebecca. Do you know what other film was released in 1941? And I guarantee you've heard of it. Citizen Kane. And the art circles there are for cinema, if you talk about greatest movies of all time, guarantee you somebody is going to bring up Citizen Kane. Rebecca, I've never seen it on best movies of all time list. I've seen other films besides Citizen Kane from that era, Casablanca, which was released in 1942, It's a Wonderful Life, whatever. But, nobody talks about Rebecca like they do Citizen Kane. Citizen Kane didn't get nominated for Best Picture. Wait. Correction. The Academy Awards website was misleading. In the year that Citizen Kane was eligible, it did get nominated for Best Motion Picture. The winner was How Green Was My Valley. Have you ever even heard of that fucker? Okay, the nominees were Blossoms in the Dust. I haven't heard of that one. Citizen Kane, Here Comes Mr. Jordan, Hold Back the Dawn, Little Foxes, The Maltese Falcon. Okay, that's a good one. I've heard of that and seen that one. One Foot in Heaven, huh? Never heard of that. Sergeant York. I've heard of it. I've seen it. It's got Gary Cooper as Sergeant Alvin C. York from Tennessee, who captured a whole bunch of Germans in World War I. And then there was suspicion. Who the fuck knows what the hell that is? But the point being, the flash in the pan moments for award ceremonies, what they pick are not necessarily what's remembered. And, people weren't reacting to Oprah because it was an award ceremony or anything like that, or even that it was Oprah. It was what she said. It was that she was being bold, which is unusual for Democrats right now. And that's what appealed to people. So that's what we have to be. Or, if you're a Green, you have to be bold. If you're a Libertarian, you have to be bold. That's what's going to get the appeal. Because, sorry, the Republicans and Trump are bad news right now. And if you somehow think that they are good news, you really aren't paying attention. And to go back to the whole, the oatmeal cartoon, forgive me, it's late for me, I'm rambling, I know, but there is some coherence to all this. Anyways, the point with that is it talks about how, certain ideas, when they're presented to you, seem threatening to you because your, ideology, that's a wrong way to phrase it, but part of your self-identity is somewhat tied in with that information. So he says, well, you have to learn how to accept that new ideas can potentially be threatening to you, even if they're correct. And that's true. But there are also, and it's far more complicated to do it, but there are ways to present ideas which conflict with, things that are part of your identity, but you can present them in such a ways that it doesn't seem quite so threatening to you. And all of us fall prey to that. There is, I planned on bringing this up in a different form, but I'll do it now because it fits. In a group I'm in, it's a science fiction related group. And, there's 3 people in this one particular discussion who really stick out, though there are more. One guy is an ardent atheist. I mean, he will not hesitate to mock anyone over their religion at the slightest provocation, right? There's another guy who is somewhat, he's spiritual but not religious. In other words, he believes there's a divine being of some sort but won't define it. And then there's a third guy who's, he's an atheist and he's just sort of blasé about the whole religion thing. Although, in certain circumstances, he's not afraid to make a jab at somebody. So the first guy, the ardent atheist, he absolutely loves The Last Jedi. Just thinks it's the best of all the Star Wars movies. And, goes on and on about them. Okay? The spiritual but not religious guy didn't like The Last Jedi. And, he gives his reasons for it, which, the ardent atheist just says, oh, no, you're wrong. Those aren't reasons for disliking it or whatever, blah, blah, blah. And I'm going to get to more of that in a minute. And then the blasé atheist guy is like, well, the spiritual but religious fellow is right about all his criticisms of The Last Jedi, but for me, they weren't enough to make the film a bad film. And I'm not spoiling anything for anybody who hasn't seen it yet, and I certainly haven't seen the film. One of the reasons I paid so close attention to the thread is if I wanted to go see the film, it's a 2-hour walk, so I'm not going to go walk and see some piece of shit movie if it takes me 2 hours to get there. So, anyways, they're going along in the discussions about the topic, right? And the spiritual but religious fellow, points out that there's an element in the previous films, one of the previous films. I'm not going to say which one. I'm not going to say what the element, because I'm not going to spoil anything for anybody. That for him just wrecks the whole thing. Well, the ardent atheist guy denies that this thing, the spiritual but not religious guy says happened. I, being the asshole that I am, posted a clip from the particular film which shows exactly what the spiritual but religious guy was talking about. The ardent atheist jumps in with like, no, that's not that at all. That's this other wild thing. Now, without you guys knowing these people, because I've been in this group for years now, you don't quite get the humor of that. But one of the things that the ardent atheist loves to do is get somebody who's religious, and there are some very devoutly religious people in this group, to say one thing and then immediately whack them with Bible verses that completely contradict that viewpoint, so that, the religious person will be forced to either admit that, well, I'm fucking idiot and I don't know my own religion, or, as they always do, deny. So, we're all plagued by this, but it's just how the information is presented to us that causes us to accept it or reject it, if we're not conscious of the instinctual desire to reject information that conflicts with values that we hold dear. When I was a kid growing up, the story that everybody was told in history class was that, the irony of slavery was that it's not really profitable, and it's the whole Confederacy was built upon a facade that would have quickly crumbled on the off chance that the Confederacy had won. And then some academic, and I don't remember his name, did a really, really in-depth study. And he went through and found that, no, despite what people commonly believed, it actually was highly profitable to be a slave owner. Who would have thought free labor would have yielded such benefits to the person that owned that free labor? And rather than people immediately saying, oh, well, gosh, we've been wrong all these years, there was vehement denial about it. It's just like today. There are people who vehemently deny that the statues of Confederate generals like Robert E. Lee and Nathan Bedford Forrest has anything to do with slavery or racism. They're just honoring people who had remarkable military achievements. And if you believe that, I have a bridge in Brooklyn I would love to sell you. And the truth, of course, is that those statues were all put up to intimidate African Americans and to glorify the slaveholding South. Again, if you were going to want to, honor Nathan Bedford Forrest for his post-war efforts at, repairing the damaged relations between the races, you depict something other than having him in his military uniform mounted on a horse. But that's not what you're trying to convey. You're trying to convey that he's going to keep them uppity black people down because they want to vote or, guys, breathe. All right, I know I'm rambling, and it's getting near the end of the hour, and I do have to edit this before I can post it, which will take me a while. One other thing I want to say, two other things now that I think about it. The first, possibly the most important, is I am going to be minimizing my use of social media as far as Facebook goes, simply because I have realized that it's not healthy for me. It's not healthy for anyone. And it's, I originally started doing it, to promote the podcast, but unless I can plunk down hundreds of thousands of dollars, it's not going to yield any appreciable benefits to me for that. And in fact, it's going to do damage to me in other ways. Because, Facebook is geared, and don't hand me this horse shit about them changing your news feed, because they're not. They say they are, but they're not really, and I'll get to that in a bit. But, their goal is engagement, and, there's an economic term, I'm sure I've mentioned it before, it's called rent seeking. It's basically where you can't figure out how to do something to justify getting more money or whatever, so you change things in such a way that you get more money for doing less work. A perfect example would be, when you can buy now, a Chromebook. Well, let's not use a Chromebook because it's not quite right. But there's going to be a new version of Windows called Windows 10s, which is Microsoft's version of the Chromebook. And the deal with that is everything, as far as your software, your applications, and your files, are all stored in the cloud. And their argument is, oh, well, now you can access them anywhere on any device, blah, blah, blah. And some of that is useful, some of that is interesting, there are benefits to that. But the goal for it is not to add services to you. The goal for it is, well, to be able to use this thing at all, you're going to have to pay us an annual lump sum of money. Rather than buying, say, your word processor for a one-time cost and using it for however long you want it. And Facebook, what they're doing, they can't figure out, because, they're interested in short-term solutions, not long-term solutions. They can't figure out how to improve engagement. So rather than, trying to actually research that, they do all this shit to, they give you an alert that this friend of yours posted this message in this particular group. Well, maybe you're not interested in that group, or you're not interested in the comment that your friend made, but because you got the notification, you're going to click on something just to get rid of the fucking notification. And that boosts Facebook's engagement stuff. Now, my reason for saying that the newsfeed isn't changing, even though they say it is because there are plenty of people that Facebook, with all their spying ways, knows. I have met in the flesh. I have, maybe it's only occasionally, or maybe it's constantly. Maybe they have lived with me. I don't see their notifications about things they've posted or anything like that in my newsfeed as often as I do posts from people I've never met and who live nowhere near me. And Facebook, if they're as good as they say they are, and when that, they claim they know you better than you know yourself, then the people closest to me should be the notifications that I see. And, I have friends who I have repeatedly tagged, hey, I am at this event with this person. When I go to my newsfeed in Facebook, I never see posts by them. I see posts by people I've never met in the flesh and that I have rarely communicated with outside of postings, so other friends who, we message each other constantly, I don't see their shit in my newsfeed, whether or not I've met them in the flesh. So, and I've realized that I've spent an inordinate amount of time digging around on Facebook just for things that I'm interested in, when if I went to the web and typed in, hey, I'm interested in this, I'd get it like that, rather than a service which supposedly is going to serve that information up to me without me even asking. So that I'm pulling away from it for at least a month or more. Yes, you're going to see postings from me, simply if for no other reason, because when I like or share something on Twitter, it shows up on Facebook. I look at Twitter mainly just to see the news. I don't look at it to see somebody's lunch or dinner or whatever, things like that. I tend to follow people who, discuss news items or who are reporters or, politicians, things like that. So that'll show up. But, regular comments from me, they're not going to be there. And that's just the way it is because, with this weird schedule that I find myself on and things that I have to do to have a sort of normal life, digging around on Facebook for something interesting is just not part of the program. I mean, like what'll happen, I'll give yesterday as an example because I wasn't up quite as late yesterday as I am today. But yesterday I get home from work, I do a couple of things, and then I go to bed. I sleep for a couple hours, wake up, and then I'm in this weird hallucinatory state where I'm awake, but not awake enough to get up and do things. And I know I have to get more sleep if I'm going to be able to function at work, so I don't get out of bed, even if I wanted to. And then, I get up in the evening and do whatever I have to do before I go to work. The point with all that being is that, in the past, I would have spent that time crawling along Facebook looking for things. Now I'm not going to do that. I'm either going to try and force myself to sleep, or I'm going to read a book or do something else. And in theory, it'll yield a better podcast. And if it doesn't, at least I tried. Okay. I thank you. I apologize for this not being the news episode. I do have some really good news stories. I will get them out in the next news episode. Sunday's episode will be Skullbeard and I going over more of the insane banality that is Maccabees. And as I said, I'm going to be jazzing up the Pseudographica because, obviously, if it's as bad, and I don't know for certain it all is as bad as the Apocrypha, it really needs more than what it's getting. So, until next time.
That's it for this episode of The Atheist in the Trailer Park Podcast. You can subscribe to the show on iTunes, Stitcher, as well as just about anywhere else podcasts can be found. Many of the episodes are also on YouTube. Follow the show on Twitter. @TParkAtheist is the show's Twitter handle. It's on Facebook at facebook.com/trailerparkatheist.com. If you happen to like the podcast, please rate it on iTunes. If you'd like to support the podcast, there's a donate button on the show notes page. You can support it via Patreon at patreon.com/TNTucker. Thanks for listening.
Say goodnight, Fuzz-Nuts.
All I know is this violates every canon of respectable broadcasting.
Damned cat.